Yo, what's going on, everybody? Welcome into another episode of Till Mets Do Us Part, live on Twitter, live on YouTube, just like we are each and every single Wednesday for all of our listeners and viewers. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. We really appreciate it. John Sapanaro out here in Los Angeles, California, and my co-host, Matt Ibby Ibanez, back in New Jersey. Ibby, I don't know what we're going to talk about this week. There's absolutely nothing going on with our Mets. They're not even in the news. They're not making news. It's sad. It's sad. It's quiet. I don't know what's going on. I'm just kidding. Of course, there is so much to get into, and I think I probably know where you want to start. But before we do that, how you feeling?
John, I am feeling fantastic. I'm so happy that this cold stove season ended a couple of weeks back. Everything's been red hot. Everything's been red hot Mets. They've been at the center of everything for the good and for the bad. And I wouldn't even consider it bad last night. The chaos that ensued when it came to Twitter for about a good hour and a half when people thought that a certain player might be on their way to Queens. But regardless, it was a fantastic time to just follow along with everything. And it's a new world for Mets fans being at the center of things. And look, sometimes you're going to get used for the good and for the bad in this sport when it comes to dealing with the likes of someone like Scott Boras. But we'll get into more of that. There is plenty of good stuff to talk about. There is so much that went on within the last time since we hit record. So I think we should get into it.
We absolutely should jump into the comments really quick. Rael, John, start with congratulating Ibby on Nimmo. We want to hear it. I don't know what you're talking about. Everybody who watches this show and follows me on Twitter knows I've been a lifelong Brendan Nimmo fan. Nobody wanted Brendan Nimmo back in the orange and blue than me. That's why I'm wearing my commemorative Brendan Nimmo jacket. I'm kidding. I don't know. No, Ibby, look, ultimately, I don't want to say you were right and I was wrong in terms of, because I did say on this show last week that I thought Brandon Nimmo would re-sign with the Mets.
Yes.
I just would not have gone that way. So everybody knows that, all jokes aside. We'll start with Brandon Nimmo. He absolutely gets the bag from our New York Mets. 8 years, $162 million. You see some of his 2022 stats right there. Look, 151 games played, career high. The WAR is a career high. You look at the slash numbers. I didn't even realize this, but he led the National League in triples last year with 7. And I put his defensive run saved and his UZR up there on the board. I think that stuff is mostly nonsense. Brandon Nimmo's become an elite center fielder, so I don't look at negative defensive run saved and all that BS. So your thoughts, and then I'll give my thoughts, but your thoughts on Brandon Nimmo coming back to our New York Mets for 8 years, $162 million.
I am ecstatic. I was so pumped up and happy when I saw the news break. Was I shocked at the total and the years? A little bit, but at the same time, based off of what we've seen this offseason from other teams outside of our Mets, it seems as though people were taking upon themselves to put out the years to lessen the AAV for certain players, depending on the overall numbers that they were going to get in the end. So I look at it as a team like our New York Mets that are trying to win, that are working within a window. They're paying a guy who I think is worthy of this money, $20 million a year. Now, some people thought he wasn't worth that. I thought he was. I just thought he was going to get the years. So they just added the year, make it a little bit less. From what I read, it seemed like he was going to be getting upwards of 25 plus from other teams. But the Mets came in, gave the years with a little extra cash towards the end. So it's like, it made all the sense in the world. And what makes me the happiest about it, and I know, and I said this to somebody, a friend that was also a Mets fan, I said, look, I understand that the end game for this team is to win ball games. You want to win. And obviously you want to have top end talent to win. And Brandon Nimmo is definitely a part of that, is the center of that. But I can't lie. And if I would be remiss if I didn't say that I am extremely excited the fact that this guy worked his ass off, became something that nobody thought he would become, and essentially get the contract that he got. And he got drafted in the year 2011 and is going to be with this team, considering, things happen towards the end, you never know. But the idea of him being here for potentially 20 years total is insane to me. And if you would have guessed anyone to be a lifelong Met, I don't think people would have thought coming out of 2011, a kid that was playing in Wyoming without a high school team would be that guy. But it's incredible. It's an awesome story. And yes, I'm very excited at the fact that Brandon Nimmo is going to be with us for the long haul.
Jump back into the comments real quick. Stevie Mack saying, fight! He wants us to fight about Brandon Nimmo. And that's a great segue to mention, if you guys are watching this live on Twitter and on YouTube, you can interact with us just like Stevie Mack and just like Rael before him. Especially on YouTube, the comments come in real time. On Twitter, not so much. So watching us over on our YouTube channel, Till Mets Do Us Part, is the best way to make that happen. And of course, if you can't interact with us live, it's all good. As soon as the broadcast ends, you can watch the entire show on replay on that same YouTube channel, or you can wait till tomorrow and listen to the audio version of this podcast, wherever it is you get your podcast, all courtesy of the Chop Sports Network. You know, all jokes aside, Ibby, look, I tweeted it out, and it's true. I'm going to support Brandon Nimmo. Brandon Nimmo plays for my New York Mets, and I know that sometimes when you give sports takes, at least me, I don't want to speak for other people, but sometimes when I give sports takes, you know, what winds up happening is I wind up, you know, defending something that I normally, you know, wouldn't want to defend. Like I did, or bashing something that I didn't want to bash. I don't want to bash Brandon Nimmo. You know, I didn't mind bashing, let's say, JD Davis, or, you know, in the last few days, I've talked a lot about Conforto. Just sometimes you have to provide the counterpoint when you're dealing with certain people. Now, you and I disagree on the value of Brandon Nimmo, right? From a dollar's perspective or a year's perspective, and that's fine. But there are other people, I interacted with them, people who are like, oh, Brandon Nimmo's an elite player, just like Shohei Ohtani. And I'm like, slow down. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. Stuff like that is really when you have to start pushing back hard. And look, maybe that's just my tactic. Maybe I didn't have to be as aggressive, but be that as it may, I'm not mad that the Mets signed Brandon Nimmo because they brought back somebody who they felt that they needed to bring back. They didn't let money, they didn't let years stand in the way. And from that perspective, look, we're all used to dealing with the Wilpons. And I said when the Mets got Lindor all those years ago on this show now, that same old Mets was dead. Some people argued that it wasn't. Then I said it after Scherzer. You and I said it on this show. Some people argued that it wasn't. Guys, same old Mets is dead and dead and dead and buried. It's not even 6 feet under. It's like in the center of the earth at this point, because there is no other way to look at it. They are going to have a payroll that is $100 million more than the next closest team. They've spent more money than anybody would have possibly fathomed. When you factor in the luxury tax, their payroll is going to be over $400 million. Their luxury tax bill alone is bigger than the payroll of, I think it's 4 separate teams. So, you know, Steve Cohen is here to stay. They're doing their thing. And so, look, it's not exactly the years or the money that I would have wanted to spend on a guy like Brandon Nimmo, but he got the money that he deserved. And, you know, I think where I was wrong, I will say this, is that I didn't value him as a $20 million a year player. And somebody said that I was living in, you know, years and years ago. Like, oh, you know, $20 million is not that much money for a baseball player the caliber of Brandon Nimmo. And I think that's where maybe I was wrong. I don't think I'm living in the past on it, but I do think that I maybe undervalued where the market would go. And that said, I like that the Mets tacked on a couple of years so that the number would be around 20 and not around 25, 26. I don't mean to pinch pennies here. Certainly Steve Cohen doesn't have to, but I do like the way the Mets got creative. And to your point, I said it about Jacob deGrom that the Mets need more legacy players to be Mets for life. And I never would have thought it would be Brandon Nimmo and not Jacob deGrom. But, you know, that's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing to have, you know, when it's all said and done, he's going to play most, if not all of his career with the New York Mets after coming up in this organization. There's only 2 players that come to mind having done that, and that's David Wright and Ed Kranepool. And now they both feel like forever ago. So all that being said, look, I'm going to root for Brandon Nimmo as hard as anybody because he's on my team. And that's ultimately what it comes down to.
And I think another thing that needs to be said is when you do something like this with a Brandon Nimmo who has the opportunity to be a lifelong Met now, is you look to the rest of your roster. And I know that we're so used to now being players for big time guys outside the organization that you want to bring in, whether you want to call mercenaries like the pitching staff that we're assembling, or you're just going out and thinking about the likes of, you know, we're looking down the lines like maybe they'll get an Ohtani, maybe they'll get a Devers, like thinking bigger, or what you thought maybe you'll get a Correa. But the idea here is also you show the love to a Brandon Nimmo, that lets somebody like a Pete Alonso, a Jeff McNeil know that, yeah, they're willing to spend elsewhere, but they're still willing to take care of their own that have been here, that have showed that they can produce, and that in the end, they will be shown a bag of money as well. Now, things change over years, but I think that that is a good sign in showing faith towards the likes of a Pete Alonso, Jeff McNeil. Look, I think when it comes to those guys, I think it's a little bit easier to say for Pete because of age, knowing that Jeff McNeil, by the time he gets, by the time he's free, if not given an extension, he'd be upwards of 32, 33 years old because he's a little bit older.
I actually think he'd be 34 by the time he's free.
So,
we did the math on it a couple of years ago, and I don't have it in front of me, so I apologize. But I think he's in the 34 years old range, which is why I've never really understood the lock up Jeff McNeil at all costs people.
Right. So that's the one thing where I would say, like, I think it's more likely for a Pete as opposed to Jeff. But look, we all love Jeff. We want him to keep on hitting and doing his thing here as well. But I think when I think of something like this, the first person I think of right away is Pete Alonso. So doing something like that, I think, is a smart thing. And yeah, just I'm excited because I was right and John was wrong.
Welcome, everybody. A few more people have jumped in over the last couple minutes. So welcome to everybody who's watching us live. And remember, your comments come in on YouTube in real time. Carlos saying, sup, peeps? What's going on, Carlos? And then kind of agreeing with me, which I appreciate. He said, don't waste your time. We know what you mean. And I know you're absolutely right. It's not worth it with the fans, some of the people that I argue with and things like that. But then he said, nah, John, you're right. Nimmo is nowhere close to a $20 million a year player, to be honest. He benefited from a crappy market. That's all. You're right, though, but we will root for him regardless. I think that's a pretty fair sentiment. And then Stevie Mack saying, crazy deal years-wise, but I'm fine with it at this point. As long as they're still bringing in a few more guys, definitely could use another solid hitting outfielder for depth. And yeah, go ahead, jump in on that, Ibby.
If there's one thing I will say, and I mentioned this because somebody in our Facebook group said the same thing after the Nimmo deal came out, and they were basically saying that they don't believe he's a $20 million a year player, or it's too much with the years and everything. And the main point that I was just trying to get across was I would understand that sentiment more when it was the old ownership, where it was like, here's your one carrot we're going to give you. And because we did this for 8 years or 10 years, then you're not getting another carrot for another 8 to 10 years because we gave you this one thing and we're not going to be able to surround you with anything else because we gave this contract. I think the idea of money and years in general are, I don't want to say it's a thing of the past, because no matter what, you're still going to try and construct a team properly, but I don't think you have to worry about the back end anymore. I don't think you need to worry about these things. We saw that already by cutting ties and just saying we'll eat the money with Cano, and we're still going to try to spend to allow ourselves to be relevant and allow ourselves to be competitive. So I think the idea of saying something about a player in terms of money for this team and this owner, I think it's a thing of the past. I know it's going to be hard to shake because you're so used to it, but I wouldn't worry about it so much.
No, I wouldn't worry about it at all, quite frankly. I was talking to Tom, my co-host over on the Goddamn Jets show, and he's a Yankees fan, but a lot of times, we're big baseball fans, both of us, and, we always talk sports. So after we went off the air on the Goddamn Jets last night, we were talking about the Mets, talking about the Yankees, and he mentioned something. He was like, in years past, if the Wilpons still owned the team, he said, you guys probably would have gotten Lindor. You may have even extended Lindor. But Ibby, to your point, he was like, but that would have been it. That would have been the move. And then it would have been like, well, look, we got Lindor. We can't re-sign Diaz, though, because he's going to want a lot of money. And, we can't probably re-sign Jake because he's going to want a lot of money. And we're going to have to go with, the Nate Eovaldi's of the world, who I actually thought at one point might fit this team. Obviously, they have completely reworked their entire starting pitching staff, and that's no longer an option. But it was such a sound point from Tom. And, like I said, he's a Yankees fan, but he's not a Mets hater, so we've always been able to talk about this stuff, just kind of free and clear from a baseball perspective. But that said, let's talk about some of the other big moves the Mets have made. I want to jump to what I think is the biggest and one that I've been championing for, and that is Kodai Senga, 5 years, $75 million. When you look at his career numbers, obviously all of that takes place in Japan. Ibby, two-time All-Star. He's got two versions of two gold gloves, the Japanese version of the gold glove. Of course, he won the Olympic gold medal in 2020. And you look at those stats, that ERA, everything is true. He throws in the mid-90s, can touch 100 miles an hour, throws that ghost forkball. And I am so excited that the Mets decided to go with Senga, especially for the money, which we can talk about in a second. But I think Senga has more upside than some of these other players that we talked about. Look, Bassett was a dog for us, but Bassett is what Bassett is. Some of these other players, Taijuan Walker, That's it. We got the best of Taijuan Walker as far as I'm concerned. Give me upside. I know there's risk involved, but again, when we're talking about the Steve Cohen Mets, they can absorb risk. They never really played in the international market under the Wilpons because they signed Kaz Matsui and it didn't work out, and they never went back there because they were afraid to do it again. So now I look at Kodai Senga, forget about the money that he got. Just as a player, he comes here with not a lot of pressure. Now, I understand there's pressure in the New York market, and I understand that he's, kind of right in the mix because he's been a great pitcher in Japan. I get that, but he's also going to be in a rotation that features two of the greatest pitchers of a generation, two people who are going to walk to the Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, and he gets to sit behind them and learn from them for a minimum of 2 years. So I think all that said, Kodai Senga was the way to go because he's the kind of guy that you can build going forward. Who knows? In 2 or 3 years, he might be the ace. I know there's opt-outs and stuff like that in the deal, but he might be your ace in a couple of years. Whereas if you re-sign Bassett or you went Taijuan Walker or Jameson Taillon or any of these guys, they're not going to be your ace in 2 or 3 years. Kodai Senga could be.
Absolutely. And the thing that's so eye-opening. I know a lot of people saw the Bassett deal. They thought he was going to get more. That's why they thought they opted for Senga instead, because there were rumors that Bassett was going to be looking for, a ridiculous amount of money. He ends up getting the 3 year, $63 million, as you can see on the screen right now. But everyone thought, oh my God, this guy's going to be getting like 4 or 5, maybe even 6 years, upwards of $90 to $100 million, which was the early rumors. And he settles for that. People were like, well, why did they just bring Bassett back? I love the upside of Senga as well. It's a risk that I think you can take when you have a Max and a Verlander in the rotation. And the other thing is this, the guy has an opt-out after 3 years. So that means it's essentially a 3-year deal for $45 million. And if the guy shows out like people think he might be able to, well, then you just really cashed in on a 3-year contract. And if he wants to re-up, then he can opt out and then he can re-up and then maybe you want to keep him. But the fact remains, it's 3 years, $45 million versus 3 years, $63 million. So there is a difference there. They saved a ton of cash when it came to, and we also talk about that, that money allocation. They saved a ton of cash when it came to opting for Senga and Quintana as opposed to Bassett and Walker. So again, we know money's not an issue, but still, you want to be smart with it. And the way they went about it, I think, was fantastic. And yes, I'm with you. I'm very excited to see what Senga brings to this team. I want to see a lot of people were talking about his stuff in general, and the fact that in the MPB they are less likely to chase. So the idea that he had the strikeout numbers that he did, if that comes over to the U.S., and you could say, well, a lot more free swingers here. So the idea of him being a strikeout pitcher here is even is even a better chance of that becoming a reality. The chase and swing rate and things like that. So I'm excited to see what he can bring, and I think slotting him right behind those two is going to be beneficial to him.
I agree. And look, I pulled it up a second ago while you were talking, but 1,486 Ks in, just over 1,300 innings pitched, that just goes to show you, he's got more Ks than innings pitched by a pretty significant margin. And, like you said, they're more disciplined. They're different kinds of ball players there that don't necessarily chase the way that they do here. And, Carlos is excited. Ghost Forkball is coming to Queens. It's there. And then all of a sudden, where the F did that pitch go? And then he said, Senga is one step closer to Ohtani, which I think we can kind of get into in a little bit. I do think that helps. I think it helps having, I think Ohtani is Ohtani. He's going to make his own decisions. He's going to go where he wants to go. He's going to do, we've never seen a player like Ohtani. So he's crazy to not go to free agency, at least explore some things. And he'll be able to write his own ticket. But I do think, having a countryman, I do think having the relationship with Billy Epler, I do think playing in another huge market with a team that's actually ready to win, I think all of that is going to be a factor. None of it hurts. Epler helps, Senga helps, Queens helps, New York market helps, Cohen helps. It all helps. So
money helps.
Money helps. Money helps the most. So, look, it's important to realize, Ibby, that, the Mets have done a ton of things that, people sort of I think some people were worried that they might not do. I gloated a little bit about this online. People said to me, there's no way that their payroll is going to be $350 million. And I was like, it's going to be, because it has to be.
It has to be.
So there's this rhetoric, right? Before we dive into some of the other moves, there's this rhetoric that's being bandied about by some Mets fans and some people who aren't Mets fans. The ones who aren't Met fans, they're jealous. I don't even want to acknowledge them. But for the Met fan that sits there and says, they spent all this money and they didn't get any better.
Oh,
what do you think about that?
What do I think about that? I think it's absolutely stupid that people want to sit there and say, oh, it's the same exact team. I'm sorry. This team won 101 games last year. You went into this offseason with so much uncertainty from the fact that you were losing a lot of players. Were you going to retain them? Were you going to run it back? How were you going to go about doing these things? The fact that they replaced players with equal-minded players, okay? So it's like, well, you're running the same thing back again. Look, I am not going to be upset at the idea of running back a team that won 101 games. Look, do I still think that a little bit of pop is needed in the lineup?
I'm sorry, just one second. They also didn't run back the same team.
No, I know. I know they
did. That's the thing. Like,
right.
People are like, well, they just replaced this guy with that guy. But, like, that's what free agency is. That's what happens when you have guys going. Would you rather them not do that? Because, Ibby, they had to. If they didn't take Carlos Carrasco's option, they would have had no starting pitchers signed, except for Max Scherzer. And if they didn't re-sign Diaz immediately, they would have no players in their bullpen except for Drew Smith. So to say that they're just running it back with the same guys because they went and got comparable guys isn't even accurate. I'm sorry I interrupted, but that's
okay.
Yeah.
But also the fact that if you didn't re-sign Brandon Nimmo, you would have two outfielders on this team, okay? Which is still why they have to attack the outfield market, and we'll get into that later on, because they need a little bit more depth because guys get hurt or whatever. It's a long season. But the point is, another thing that I cannot stand. I'm glad you gave me this because I want to really get this off my chest. I cannot stand the fact that people have the nerve to go DeGrom to Verlander is basically like a wash. And I go, first of all, that's you're assuming that Justin Verlander is only going to give us 11 starts. This team won 101 games last year where Jake won, five or six games in 11 starts, okay? I understand how great Jacob DeGrom is. I'm not saying, look, Jake can go out and have a phenomenal year. He might do that. But if Justin Verlander, think of it this way, if Justin Verlander goes out there this year, look, do I think he's going to pitch to a 1.75 ERA and win the Cy Young? I don't. But I could say that the guy can win 15 games and pitch to a, let's call it a 3.2 ERA. That in itself is a huge improvement onto what you brought last year. So the fact that people are saying it's the same exact thing is absolutely ridiculous. And I've said this multiple times on the show in the past, the fact that people, Mets fans in general, are bothered at the idea of just retaining players is ridiculous, because any other team, if you said to them, hey, well, you got Nimmo, you got Diaz. It's like, well, yeah, you got the number 2 outfielder on the market and the number 1 reliever on the market, but it's like, oh, well, those are just re-signs for the Mets. They're damn good ball players. I thought that was the name of the game. You want good ball players on your team. So when I see nonsense like that, it's so stupid. It's the same old Mets fans that just want to be miserable, that have not adopted to the idea of actually just being confident as a team, as a fan of this franchise. Change the way you think. Oh,
you have to. And, it's funny because, there's a lot of comments coming in. I'll jump into them there in a second. But, you look at a guy like Verlander, and you look at what Verlander was able to do last year. Look, I'm not sour grapesing this thing. I'm not looking at it like, oh, all of a sudden, I hate Jacob DeGrom. No, I think if Jacob DeGrom is healthy, he's the best pitcher in the universe. We've said that a million times. He's probably better than Justin Verlander at this stage in their career. I think over the course of their career, obviously Verlander has had a better career. He's got 2 World Series championships. He's got an extra Cy Young. He's got a no-hitter. He's had a better career, but if you wanted to start today going forward, you would probably bet on the younger guy being better. However, Verlander has a rebuilt UCL. I don't care that he's 39 years old. He's got a rebuilt UCL, and he's coming off of a season where he had his best ERA and he won a Cy Young. Jacob DeGrom is coming off of 2 seasons where he pitched only half a season or less in both of them. So to say, oh, it's just a wash is completely ridiculous, and I think it's totally irrelevant. So great points out of you. The other thing I want to bring up is some of the other positions around the field. Look, I know Lindor had a great year. I know Alonso had a great year. And I know McNeil had a great year. But they all had years. Like, they weren't like, oh my God, this is undoable again kinds of years. Now, maybe you say, okay, McNeil won't hit 330. He's not going to win the batting title. But if you told me McNeil's going to hit 315 next year, I believe you. If you told me that Lindor could have a comparable season, I would believe you. You told me Alonso's going to hit 40 and lead the league in RBI, I would believe you. You know, these are not like an Aaron Judge 63 home runs, whatever kind of barrage where you're never going to see it again. All of those guys are in the prime of their careers, and I think they can duplicate it. And then you look at regression to the mean from other guys. You think Escobar is really going to be that bad again? Escobar's been a career professional hitter his entire life. I think what we saw in August and September is more true of Escobar than what we saw for the rest of the season. Also, catching was so bad that Alvarez, if Alvarez hits 200 as a starting catcher and hits 18 home runs. You said 15. 18 home runs, 15 home runs. That's going to be like a 200% increase from what we got. And I don't think he's going to do that, because I think if Alvarez plays from the start of the season, which I think he will, because I think it's an Alonso situation where their hand is going to be forced, he makes loud contact and they have no better options. If he plays a full season, it'd be by accident, I think Alvarez will hit 20 to 25 home runs, even if the average isn't there. Do you realize the jump in production that we could potentially get from third base, catcher, and DH with just a few tweaks, all of which were black holes last year? So I still think, like you, that they need to add something to the offense. And look, I would have taken Correa. I think Correa is smart and savvy, and we can talk about that in a minute, because we're getting too much in the weeds on this, but it's just insane to me that people can look at what was done and go, oh, they haven't done enough. And again, if you're a fan of another team, I don't want to hear from you because you're just jealous you don't have Steve Cohen. This dude who was a Yankee fan tried to argue with me about it, and he was like, I was like, dude, I said you would give the entire left half of your body to science to let Steve Cohen own your team. Are you kidding me? And I don't want to hear shit from Yankee fans like him. Rings this, rings that. Then he turned around and had the audacity to tell me that he thought George Steinbrenner was the worst owner in the history of American sports. Dude, you cannot be in your 30s and go rings, 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 and then turn around and say that George Steinbrenner is a bad owner, because you'd have 0 rings in your lifetime without George Steinbrenner. So anyway, I can't.
It's too like I can't stand. Yeah, just to wrap it up, I can't stand the people that think that everything has to be brand new. It's not going to be that way. Look, there are going to be pieces that are brought in, but the fact that they retained players and they are still on the cusp of being the team that they were last year. Look, do I think they're going to win 101 games again? Winning 100 games is not easy, okay? Like I said this last show, they could go out and have a fantastic season and win 95 games, and it could be a dogfight in the East, which I think it's going to be, and they could win 95 games. Look, that's all very possible, but the fact is this team won 101. They had so many free agents, and they're still considered one of the top dogs now as we continue through this offseason, one of the top dogs in all of the NL, as well as in their own tough division, the NL East. And the fact that people want to complain about that makes absolutely 0 sense. Again, you're not getting a superstar at every position. The way this team is building is fantastic, okay? There are still some things that need to get done. I admit that. The bullpen could use another arm or two. The offense, specifically the outfield and even on the infield, when it comes to some sort of power, be it on the bench, fourth outfielder, DH type, right-handed bat, left-handed bat, however you want to go about talking about it, and we will talk about it. Look, there are options, and I think it was telling today when questions were asked to Billy Epler, and he says, look, we're going to have some more of these meetings, and it's going to be more so surrounded around the offense. He knows that they're going to bring something in. We're all curious. They have to. We're all curious as to how many people that might be, and we'll talk about it. But it's going to get done because they know it has to get done.
I want to jump back into the comments. Everybody who is watching us live, of course, thank you for tuning in, taking time out of your day to do this each and every single week with us. We appreciate it. It's keep growing, and we appreciate you guys with the word of mouth and spreading it around. The best thing to do, of course, is to subscribe and turn those notifications on so that when we go live, you know it's happening and you don't miss it. Also, I apologize because I know our schedule's been erratic. It's been mostly my fault, but 4 p.m. Eastern on Wednesdays, like we are live right now, is the time, going forward, barring something unforeseen. So, there's a lot of great points across the board. Stevie Mack saying Verlander, Senga, and Quintana, 187 million combined. He who shall not be named, and we're not talking about Voldemort, 185 million. There you go. Yes. Savvy spending, smart moves by this team. It's not just, Billy Epler's out there spending money on a blank check.
Right.
When you look at those numbers compared, one pitcher for 3 pitchers with the exact same dollar amount, basically. Then we've got Jeff Cohen jumping in saying just to bring back the same team would have been expensive. It would have been expensive to just bring back the same team. Which
I mentioned that a couple times
ago. I think the Mets did a better job of it. These guys were all free agents all at the same time. Jeff then chiming in saying Verlander will give the Mets a professional start each and every single time out on the mound, which echoes everything that you said. And then we've got a commenter who I think is finally back in town. We got David back. What's up, guys? Long time no see. I'll honestly say I didn't want Verlander, but for the contract he had, it's fair. Now we need to get some more bats in the lineup. We're definitely going to talk about that coming up in the second half. Ibby, we're just over 30 minutes, so I think now's actually a good time to take the break, sort of reset and come back in, talk Carlos Correa, some of the smoke that was there, and then, segue the conversation into what's going on with the bats, what's going on next for the Mets and all that good stuff. So everybody who's watching live, if it's your first time watching, it's just a quick 10-second ad spot for the audio version of the podcast. John Sapanaro, Matt Ibby Ibanez. We will be right back with Till Mets Do It. Yo, just like that, we are back. John Sapanaro, Matt Ibby Ibanez, Tilt Mets Do Us Part, live on Twitter, live on YouTube. The best way for you to interact with the show as we do the show. But of course, if you don't have time, you can always watch it back on our YouTube channel as soon as we're done with the broadcast, or you can listen starting tomorrow morning, wherever you get your podcast, all courtesy of the Chop Sports Network. Ibby, we've touched on this guy a little bit here and there, but we really didn't deep dive on it, and that is Carlos Correa. The news broke last night that he signed with the San Francisco Giants for an enormous sum of money over a ridiculous amount of years, 13 years, $350 million for Carlos Correa. But more importantly, before any of that, there was a lot of whispers that the Mets were back in on it. Ken Rosenthal put it out. Michael Mayer, who was on this show, he put it out there, and he's got some good connections. We heard about it a little bit on MLB Network from Carlos Pena. It was floated out even a little bit by Carlos Baerga, who had been breaking stuff. He said, hey, maybe the Mets, maybe the Yankees, maybe the Twins, maybe the Giants. So what was your feeling when you were hearing, because you texted me about it. You were like, listen, this is nonsense until it isn't. And then all of a sudden you were like, it might not be nonsense.
Right.
So what was your feeling in about the hour and a half where the Mets were very much in on Carlos Correa?
It was, I was talking with Aunt Rivera, somebody Shea, and we were going back and forth. And I was like, dude, I don't know what to really feel right now, because when I texted you and I said, look, this is all nonsense, everyone's feeding into this fake account, and then a half hour after the fact Rosenthal comes out with his, I'm like, oh man, does this guy actually have something? Because look, you've seen fake accounts that say something 4 days prior because they think they have an idea, and then something might happen, and then they try to take credit for it. Well, it's like this happened within 25 minutes, a half hour. So I was like, maybe this guy does have something. I don't know. And then, like you said, Rosenthal goes about it, Mayer goes about it, starts spreading. Twitter is on fire for an hour. Everyone's just constantly refreshing, thinking about the idea of it. Look, I was in a state of just not knowing how to truly feel, and Ant would back me up on that. I was like, I don't know how to really think like this, because this would be absolutely insane if it actually happened. Now, I was thinking along the lines of them saying, like, I thought his market had collapsed, and it would be, well, they might just offer him another deal similar to what he got in Minnesota, and he might take it for a year, think if he's in a better lineup, do something in the postseason potentially, and then that would add to his value yet again. But I had also said to some people on Twitter, I go, I wouldn't be shocked if the Mets are being used here to try to get a team across the finish line. And that ends up happening. Look, I think we have to get used to the life of being used in that sense, because when you have the biggest wallet, all a Scott Boras or any other agent can say is, okay, I'll call you right back. I got Steve Cohen on the other line. And that's all that needs to happen, where it's like, okay, we'll give you the extra year. We'll throw in the extra $35 million and let's close this. And then that's all they have to do. So it's a life we have to learn how to get used to. I know some people that I was seeing some things earlier on Twitter, like people were trying to take exception with that, saying how the Mets got worked and this and that. It's like, dude, I didn't care about that. I didn't expect.
Also, Steve Cohen doesn't get worked. You've seen what happens when Steve Cohen gets worked. He got worked on Steven Matz, and we got Max Scherzer. He got worked by Jacob deGrom. We got Justin Verlander. Let the Mets get worked. I'll be happy in the Mets get worked. Come on.
Right. So yeah.
Best things that have ever happened to us as Mets fans were a direct result of the Mets getting worked under Steve Cohen's ownership.
So yeah, the idea of it was very, tantalizing, if you will. Like I was thinking about potential lineups and him playing third base and thinking, oh my God, this and that, and now the structuring of the lineup, and you can still be aggressive in the next 2 years. It's like, yeah, all those things crossed my mind. I'm not going to lie and say that it didn't, but it didn't happen. He gets his giant bag from San Francisco. You knew the Giants had to do something after taking that big swing on Judge and missing. You knew they were going to be players. And I think they threw out rumors potentially about Dansby Swanson as well. So I think that was, again, them playing that cat and mouse game with Scott Boras. Boras wins out in the end. His clients are cleaning up. Once Rodon signs, I'm pretty sure Boras' clients will cross the $1 billion mark in this market already. Wow. So he is really doing a great job for his clients. And it was a wild hour and a half. Crazy.
Look, and I didn't get a chance to actually I don't want to say enjoy it or live it is probably the better way to put it. Because when I was texting you, I was on my way to go play softball, and then I was playing the game. And by the time the game was over, Correa had signed. So I kind of missed all the anxiety. Now, having said that, everybody who watches this show, everybody who follows me knows I was championing for Correa. But once they signed Nimmo, I kind of got the thought out of my head, because for me, it was always Nimmo or Correa. How are you going to allocate those dollars? The fact that the Mets were then in on Correa, because like you said, they looked and they saw the market collapse a little bit, to me is amazing. It's astonishing. I also think there's probably a little bit of truth to the fact that they were getting not worked, but used, right? Yes. The history of doing that, he did it with the Yankees. He did it with Boston for all of those years. He's going to go to the high value teams and try to bring in or try to raise the price around, or try to cross the finish line on another deal. So there's probably a little bit of truth to both of those things. But Ibby, I do think, much to the point of Carlos here from a minute ago, Correa was a possibility. Lindor and Nimmo were working on it, but it had to be our kind of deal. Low years, higher AAV. He got both, so it is what it is. We move on.
That's it, yeah.
I think that both things could be true at the same time. Do I think Boras swept back in to get Steve Cohen involved so that maybe he could finish the deal with San Francisco? Yeah, probably, because that's what a good agent would do. But on the other side of things, he knows that when he gets owners involved, like George Steinbrenner, like Steve Cohen, the chances they're going to go, hey, you know what? Screw it. Let's get him. So it's both things. And I think the Mets did see Correa's market going in a place where they said, okay, I mean, 5 years, 30 million. We can do 5 years, 30 million, give you an opt-out after 1 or give you an opt-out after 2, whatever the thing is. And we probably may never know the details of what the Mets were looking to do or trying to offer. But to me, it ties in with what we were talking about at the top of the show, and we'll segue into this now, the Billy Epler press conference, where he said, look, we're going to have more press conferences. We're going to have more people on the offense, and we're going to continue. We think the heavy lifting is done, but we're going to continue to be opportunistic. I think opportunistic was the perfect word to use, because I think the Correa situation was exactly that. Opportunistic. Even if Boras just called Steve Cohen and Billy Epler to try to get a deal from the Giants, there was still like hey, what are we talking here? What do we actually mean? And I think that's where you see the difference now, is that they will entertain anything. No, they're not going to have a $30 million player at every position. They're not going to have an all-star at every position, Ibby. But if a guy they can use is available via trade or via free agency, the Mets are going to entertain it, period. And that is the best part about being a Mets fan right now.
Absolutely. The fact that no matter what, you are never out on someone. And that was the point that I was feeling. It's like I never felt that Correa was an option. And I always thought that, people who were, like you said, championing for it or thinking that it was going to happen even after the fact of Nimmo, I was like, guys, come on. Like, I understand being excited, but we got to like rein it in a little bit. But when you see that they were a player, it's like, no matter what, if things fall back, to a certain point where it's like you can be a player again, it's like it lets you know that the Mets are never out on anything. Never out on anything. They're always going to be at the center of something if opportunity is there to make this team better. And that's what we have always wanted as fans. We always wanted a plan, and we always wanted to make sure that this team was doing anything and everything it could to be a better team. And we have an ownership, we have a front office now that is doing that, and they are still working, and there's still more work to be done. And I'm very confident in everything they're doing so far, and I'm pretty sure they're going to get everything they need by the time the season rolls around.
And a lot of people in the comments agreeing with us, because here's the thing too. We can talk about everything from a Boris perspective, from a Mets perspective, from a Correa perspective, how real it was, how tangible it was. But I do think, Ibby, both of these points are completely accurate. Also, just from a standpoint of San Francisco, Stevie Mack saying Boris absolutely rocked San Fran. They fell right into his trap. Look, they swung big at Judge and they missed. And sometimes after you swing and miss, you have to exercise patience or temperance or whatever. Look, I would have given Aaron Judge any dollar amount he wants to play for my team within reason. But you know what I mean? Hyperbole there, well drenched in hyperbole. But Carlos Correa is not, he's excellent. And I would take him on the Mets tomorrow, but he is not the same player. And, Rael basically echoes that. He's not the same player as Aaron Judge. San Francisco got Boris, 13 years. They have him until he's 42. Look what happened to Trout right after that 12-year sign. Harper after 13, completely insane. And when you look at it, the proof is in the pudding. Look, he's got good numbers, but he doesn't have the most elite numbers you've ever seen. Yeah, Rookie of the Year, World Series champion, but two-time All-Star. He's a Gold Glove winner one time, probably got jobbed out of another Gold Glove. But you look at some of his numbers, Ibby, and, he's a very good player. I don't know if he's a 13-year commitment kind of player. Now, I know the 13 years did get the dollars under $30 million a year.
28.5.
28.5, exactly. Yeah. So there is that part of it. But I think when you start dealing in deals like that, this is not the same as Brandon Nimmo, 6 versus 8. To me, 6 versus 8 is kind of a wash. 13 versus 10 even is a big, big difference. Just give the guy $30 million a year and call it a day and walk away. You're sitting there giving him 13 years. To me, that's the problem. To me, it's the years, not the dollars.
Yeah, I think the fact that the dollar amounts are always going to keep getting higher and higher with players, I think that's why you're seeing the lower AAV on these higher end deals, just because they're trying to protect themselves on the back end, where a player might not be the player that he was on the front end. You could say, well, at least I'm only paying him $28 million. And then $28 million, 10 years from now might be what $18 million is now. Like, we have no idea what it's going to be in that time. But the way things have gone in baseball, it's always going up, up, and up. And look, these contracts are only going to feed into the likes of Shohei Ohtani and Juan Soto over the next 2 years.
Yeah, Carlos saying, if we say Nimmo was overpaid, then Correa just stole the lottery jackpot. That is fair. Jeff Cohen saying, this class of shortstops are locked up. Even Wander Franco from the Rays and Tatis from the Padres. Crazy. I mean, really, the only person we're waiting on is Dansby Swanson, and he'll get his eventually. I don't know if it's going to be with Atlanta or not. Probably not. And then Atlanta will turn around and be like, oh, the Mets spend all the money. Shut up. You guys spend no money. I don't know what kind of blackmail pictures your GM has on every player that comes up through your organization. But at some point, you're going to have to spend money to keep somebody. They let Freddie Freeman walk. I think it's easy to say they're going to let Dansby Swanson walk, barring something unforeseen. Dansby's a good ball player. Freddie was the class of that organization. So if they let him walk, they will let absolutely anybody walk. Ibby, there's a lot of places we can go over the next several minutes. I do want to take an opportunity to address something before we start talking about hypotheticals that was big for the Mets that we didn't get a chance to talk to in the first half just because it was so dominated by, Nimmo and Senga. But the Mets made another signing that is terrific, and that is David Robertson, 1 year, $10 million, former World Series champion, all-star, 157 saves, so you've got a legit backup to Diaz, and that career ERA is absolutely sterling for me. A lot of people wanted him at the deadline. I think the Cubs wanted too much for him at the deadline. I don't think the Mets should have entertained that, but they rectify it now by going out and getting a damn good relief pitcher in David Robertson.
And it's crazy because once the it kind of happened on a back-to-back where it's like, oh my God, they signed him out. Oh my God, they signed David Robertson too. So that was really cool. And I think he fits in very well. I love the idea that he has 157 saves in his career. So he knows how to work the back end well. And I only bring that up because we've seen Buck do what he should do. And that is, hey, if I have to use Diaz in the 8th inning because the heart of the lineup's coming up, I'm going to bring him in here, get us out of this, and then he knows that he has someone like a Robertson on the back end that can close out a game that's been there, who's done it before. So I think he is a fantastic fit. And again, if it is something where if this does spell the end of Adam Ottavino, look, I would love to see Adam back. I don't think it's going to happen. I think he's going to get more from somewhere else, but I'm still hoping that they can have both of them because hell, I want to have a fantastic bullpen, because if there's one thing I will say, it's that when you're constructing a starting staff the way that they are choosing to do, you have to make sure you have bullpen because you're going to be using it more times than not. Because look, we don't need to see Max or Verlander go 7-8 innings in the beginning of June. You don't need to see that.
You probably shouldn't. And there are times in the year, there's times in the year where you should probably go to a 6-man rotation considering the depth that they have. I want to see a little bit of David Peterson. I want to see a little Tyler McGill, get Joey Lucchesi in the mix. The Mets are 8 starters deep right now. I would trade Carlos Carrasco in the right deal, not just to dump salary, but if you tell me you can get better somewhere else, fine. But other than that, I want to keep it 8 deep because every team needs about 7 starters anyway, and I want to see them try to keep these guys fresh. We talked about burnout with Max Scherzer last year. We saw what Justin Verlander did in the World Series. You know what I mean? Some of these guys need to get a little bit more rest. I know you don't want to take the ball. They don't want you to take the ball out of their hands, but sometimes you have to be smarter. And I think a guy like Buck is the right manager to say, hey, Max, I'm protecting you from you. Justin, I'm protecting you from you. I got 4 Manager of the Year awards for a reason. You can trust me.
And I'm glad that you brought up the whole idea of trading Carrasco, because it is an interesting thing to talk about. I know a lot of people are very one side or the other. It's like a hardcore sense. It's like, no, do not trade this guy. We have a staff. It's deep. You're always going to need pitching. You have that side. And the other side's like, no, get rid of him if you can get something better. But if you just look at it, and the reason why I'm saying it is because Daniel Wexler, who I brought up before, brought up a good stat that I wanted to bring to the show. I want to make sure I give him credit. He said something along the lines of Carlos Carrasco allowed 3 or less runs 22 times, including a run of 12 starts from July 3rd to September 20th, where he had a 296 FIP, a 2.42 ERA, averaging 5.3 innings per start. Okay, and I say that 5.3 innings per start, which is exactly the innings average that Quintana had last season. So again, it's an older staff where you're lucky to get those 5 innings from some of those guys, right? So you have to make sure that you are protected on the back end. So I am curious, if they were to get rid of Carrasco, it has to be the proper move. If I'm losing him, I know that there was a rumor originally that said they want to get back a young pitcher. I'm like, well, who the hell is giving up a young pitcher for Carl? It doesn't make sense. No. If anything, Carrasco would be attached with a prospect, and maybe if you were lucky enough to get rid of McCann as well while eating some money, then maybe you can get back some sort of bat. Something along those lines would make some sense. But it's
which I would do in the right deal. I know that's just a hypothetical and we don't have it lined up, but yeah, I would do something like that.
So something like that, it would make sense because you're protecting yourself in that way. Where it's like, well, if I'm going to add to the offense, I plan on scoring more so I can take a little bit from my pitching in that sense. So yeah, it's a tough spot. So I'm not 100% on board with dealing Cookie, But again, if it is something that truly, truly makes a ton of sense, I would entertain it, but I'm not out there, just saying, let's trade this guy. Also, whoever the jackass is yesterday during that holiday thing who asked the guy, like, he's giving presents to kids who are like, hey, Carlos, what are your thoughts on potentially being traded? Like, read the room, idiot.
I know.
Read
my
the
God.
room.
So dumb. So dumb. Look, I'm with you on this. I brought it up because it's out there. I don't think the Mets should, but I'm with you in that I think having a hardline stance either way is wrong. I think get Cookie out of here is crazy, and I think, oh my God, we can't trade him is crazy. I think if the right deal presents itself, trade him. If it doesn't, don't. You don't need salary relief. You're not doing it for that. You would be doing it in a way that makes the team better. And, oh, by the way, if it helps you shed a little bit of salary along the way, like maybe you get a young bat in the deal, like, somebody like the deal wouldn't make sense because I don't think they'd want a pitcher like Carrasco. But if you're getting like a deal somehow and you're getting Dalton Varsho or something like that, where you're getting a young, controllable offensive player, I could see, why you'd want to do that and give up a guy who's making $14 million. It also shows you, Ibby, there's a lot of savvy. We talked about before how they absolutely needed to sign that deal when they signed that deal to keep Carrasco, because otherwise their rotation was in flux. They didn't know if they were going to keep DeGrom. They didn't know they could go get Verlander. They didn't know that they'd get Senga. They didn't know they'd get Quintana. Of course they were going to try. But when you're dealing with free agents, sometimes guys just don't want to be in a certain place. You saw it with DeGrom, who left for whatever reason. I know he got more money, but there's something deeper than that. You saw it last offseason with a guy like Gausman, who went and took less money to pitch in Toronto so that he couldn't be here in New York. So he obviously didn't want to be here. So I think sometimes you do have to take that into account. So I think savvy moves all the way around. I want to give you your credit, Ibby. Carlos saying, thank you, Ibby. Great point about the bullpen. Ibby in the zone, NBA Jam voice. He's on fire. And then Stevie Mack saying Verlander and Senga are both used to having more rest, so a six-man rotation makes a lot of sense. I would not do it for the whole season, but I would do it, somewhere between maybe the end of June and all of August, somewhere in that range where you could kind of get guys a little bit more rest as it gets hot, as you're playing a lot of games. July and August, it's like seems like there's no off days at all, and you're just going and going and grinding. So I think keeping these guys fresh in both the bullpen and with an extra starter is going to be important. What do you got?
I got one for you, just real quick. I don't want to like take away from everything else we got to do still, but just one quick one. Yeah. I will say is an idea just pulled up out of my head. What if would you do Carlos Carrasco and we'll say a prospect in the 11 to 15 range for a Max Kepler type?
Yeah, I would probably do that.
I think kind of makes sense. I think that kind of makes sense.
I think that gives you the kind of offensive boost that we're still looking for. Another bat, not a superstar bat, but certainly a way above average bat. And I think that makes you better while you're not robbing Peter to pay Paul so much. That's a good one. Max Kepler is a good kind of prototype player. I like that deal. I think, depending on who the prospect is or whatever, I would probably do that deal though, like 11 to 15 plus a Carrasco to get back up. I would do that deal. Would you do it?
I'm a Max Kepler guy. I'm a fan of his, so I like the idea of him being someone. Now, look, there are ways that people can easily say, well, you can keep Carrasco and just pay someone similar to a Kepler that's on the market now, and we'll talk about that guy in a minute, I'm sure. But it's definitely an interesting one, and the fact that you keep on hearing the Mets are interactive when it comes to the trade market, like they're in the midst of it, and Billy mentioned something today as well, as they are still on the phones talking with people. So I do think something like that is possible. But like I said, it's got to line up properly, and it is something that I think it could make sense. But it's also it's going to be interesting because, like I said, I think you have to be wise and protect yourself because of the fact that this staff is a little bit older in the tooth.
Yeah, we've got Stevie Mack saying Carrasco in a lower prospect for one of the D-backs, young outfielders like Alec Treble, since they have a plethora of outfield prospects right now. I do think that
Yeah.
the D-backs match up a little bit well with the Mets in that regard, but I just don't know that they would want Carrasco. What were you going to say?
They wouldn't want Carrasco, Stevie, and the main thing I'm bringing up is because it was Alec Thomas, and he didn't they were asking for Brett Beatty in return. That's the whole thing, which is why it's tough to deal with. And I mentioned this before when we talked about Zach Gallen a couple of weeks ago. It's very hard to deal with the likes of an Arizona right now because they're a team that's on the come up because they're so young, but the young talent they have is very good and it's controllable. So when people bring up the likes of Thomas, when they bring up the likes of Dalton Varsho, like when I heard Varsho and Houston, I was like, Houston can't afford it because they don't have the farm system to get someone like a Varsho. So when you talk about those likes and a Gallen, it's like those guys have 3-4 years control. They're cheap and they're borderline all-stars. So they're going to cost a lot. So I don't think that one matches up, but I get where your head's at least.
Yeah, that's why I said Varsho, but I was like, it doesn't work for Carrasco, but he's the type of player I would target. And that's why when you said Max Kepler, it's great job out of you because he's, a little bit further along and he's closer to making money. A lot of that makes sense. Stevie Mack says, they're on crack if they wanted Beatty for
Well, the Mets hung up quick. They did hang up quick.
As they should. And then Carlos saying Tyler O'Neill? Question mark.
That's not a bad one. I hate the Cardinals, but it's not a bad one.
Tyler O'Neill's not a bad one. I don't know if Carrasco gets that done, though. I know he's a little bit further along than the D-back guys that we're talking about, but I don't know that Carrasco gets that done. I don't know if it's enough to move the needle. Ibby, there's a couple of guys I'm going to throw at you rapid fire here. We got about 5 or 6 minutes or so left to play with here. So if the Mets don't go from a trade perspective, and there's still guys on the free agent market that can make a difference. So your thoughts on possibly JD Martinez?
I've been a JD Martinez fan for a while. I thought what he gave Boston was incredible on a 5-year, $110 million contract, winning a World Series there, like the offense that he put up. But the thing that I worry about with JD Martinez, and I saw that you already saw what I said on Twitter because you liked the tweet from the show account. And the point that I was making from somebody else was the fact that if you take on a JD Davis, it's an offensive help to an
JD
extent.
Martinez. Don't say JD Davis.
I said Davis. I'm sorry. JD Martinez. I apologize. JD Martinez. The fact is he doesn't really provide anything from the outfield standpoint. So it's another hitter, which is what you need. But I'll talk about his offense in a second. But when you have the likes of a Vogelback already and you have JD Martinez, it's kind of like it's making your bench situation a little bit tougher. And if anything, we know that the Mets like their flexibility. So I do think that if you were to take on a JD Martinez, you're going to have to continue and get something else where you can get more help for the outfield. You have to get something else because you can't put that guy in the outfield because he has his back issues. You can't do it. He's basically, if he comes here, he's basically a DH.
I'll say this to you. I think that the Mets cannot carry both Vogelback and JD Martinez. For me, that's why JD Martinez is out. I don't think you could carry two guys who basically cannot play a position, especially when there are other options out there. I would rather have Justin Turner. I know he's not the defensive player that he used to be, but he can play still third base. You could probably put him at first base, so I think you have better options there. Jeff Cohen brought up a guy who's been brought up a few times in the comments. I don't know if Jeff brought him up first. I apologize if somebody else did, but I'm seeing this one now. Adam Duvall, I think, is a better fit, Ibby. So now I'll toss this guy to you. He can play all three outfield positions, including center field and DH. So I think he's a better fit for me than JD Martinez. Your thoughts?
Adam Duvall, I think Adam Duvall makes a lot of sense. I know he had a rough year last year, but the year prior, what did he get? 38 home runs, something.
38 home runs, 114 RBIs, something like that.
Like the guy can hit. He had a bad year. I would definitely take the flyer on him. Maybe he'll have a bigger market. I don't know, but I would definitely take the flyer on him. And if there's one thing, and I'm going to bring up somebody else, which we have to mention because I know Rael brought him up earlier, and it's a talk of Mets Twitter.
Dun, dun, dun.
I'm waiting.
Wait. Just look at my face.
So if there's one person that I will bring up, it's Michael Conforto as well. But the main reason why I want to bring him up is because I know a lot of people are attached to the name JD Martinez, right? Everyone at the deadline last year was like, JD, you gotta get him. He's a superstar hitter. It's like we have to understand he had a solid first half, right? Second half, he fell off a cliff. I brought up some numbers that I looked up because I was like, I have to look at something. I looked at JD Martinez's second half last year. Okay. His second half, which was atrocious. Okay. And it had to do with the back issues. Maybe it's the aging as well. 215 at bats, 50 hits, 7 home runs, 24 RBIs, a 233 average, a 701 OPS, and he had a weighted runs created plus of 94. That is not good. Okay. Not good. Now, in comparison, we remember how bad Michael Conforto was in 2021. He was terrible, right? Second half, first half, didn't matter. He was awful. Michael Conforto's second half that year, 60 hits, 11 home runs, 35 RBIs, a 252 average, 792 OPS, and 118 weighted runs created plus. So everyone said Conforto stunk. My co-host included said he stunk. Okay,
he did
with reason. He did.
He had like 175 for the first two and a half.
But that shows you. But that also shows you that JD second half was god awful. It was bad. It wasn't easy to watch. And everyone said, "Oh, you could have got Martinez." Well, it's like Vogelback crushed him in terms of production in the second half. But because of the name, a lot of people just go off of name value as opposed to looking at the numbers. All right. So numbers don't lie. So in that sense, you look at it, it's like that's kind of rough. And I bring that up because my segue into Conforto is why he potentially, again, I say potentially because I don't know, a guy off of a shoulder, you never know. We see it with Bellinger. You never know off of the shoulder. So the only reason is I look at Conforto, and when you look at Fangraphs, when it comes to the projections for this year, they're both similar. So if I'm getting similar production from both players, I would opt for the younger player and the other guy that can actually play all 3 outfield positions. That would be my point there. Look, if they bring in JD, I'm going to pray that the guy stays healthy and he hits 25 home runs. I will root for it, but that's why I have my reservations about him.
Rael saying, thank you, John. I needed that face. John, Angry Andy can't watch live, but he was hoping for it too. Carlos Ramos saying, please no, hearing Conforto coming back is like getting hit with a chair and falling through a table. And Stevie Mack saying, and underneath that table is a bunch of thumbtacks. Oh my God, that's Conforto's music. No, listen, I agree with you, Ibby, in the sense that if you're going to look at those two guys, give me the younger guy who can play the outfield. That's Conforto, right? So, but I say that saying that I wouldn't want either one of them. I'm a no on JD Martinez, right, and I'm a no on Conforto.
Well, I'm curious
the main reason why. Well, the main reason why no on Conforto is twofold. One, I know he was bad 2 years ago. I'm less concerned about that and more concerned about his shoulder. Yes. I don't want to bring in a guy. Everybody's saying, we need offense. We need offense. You're going to go get it from a guy who just missed a full season with a secret shoulder surgery nobody knew about? No, thank you. That's the first part. Second part is everybody on this show who goes back a couple of years since we started knows that I like Conforto, but Conforto to me is d'Arnaud. 6 years of mediocrity, 6 years of never living up to it. I was okay. Now, I know he had some standout years. You know, he had those 2 big home runs in the World Series. Everybody loves that. He had the All-Star season. Everybody loves that. And he had the 1 year where I think he hit 30 home runs. Those are 3 moments for Conforto. A first half, 1 game, albeit a really big game in a really big spot, and 1 season where he put together, you know, a big power numbers. Outside of that, he did not do a lot. Now, he's great on defense. I'll give him that. But I don't want to revisit that. I was okay with letting him walk. I'm okay with letting him be gone. For me, also, he's left-handed. And I think if you already have Vogelback, I want a right-handed hitter, which brings me back to JD Martinez. But then I don't want JD Martinez either. So I kind of look at them as weirdly, in a different way than you brought up, but like weirdly the same player. They have different warts, but both guys have stuff that wouldn't want me to bring them back, especially when you could go get Adam Duvall, who plays, you know, all 3 outfield spots. And Stevie Mack pointed out in the past, he's played first and third. I wouldn't put him at third at this point in his career, but he could probably back up at first in a pinch. So that helps. Plus, he's a bit of a masher coming off of a down year. I think you can get him on the cheap, or go get me a guy with more of a track record like a Justin Turner. Go get me who's also right-handed. I know he doesn't help you in the outfield, but he would allow you to carry a guy like Vogelback better because Justin Turner, while primarily a DH, I don't think is exclusively a DH. Also, who's going to back up first base right now? We do need somebody who can at least put a glove on whose name is not Darren Ruff. So, right. At this point, I think they're going to have to look somewhere else. And I know I said this on Twitter before we went live, Ibby. I know that last week I said I would be into or at least open to the possibility of a Conforto return, but that was contingent on a few different things. That was us signing Correa, not Nimmo, so Nimmo goes somewhere else. Now we need an outfielder. I also said I wanted Correa and Bellinger. Bellinger is already signed somewhere. I said I would have wanted then Correa and Benintendi. I don't think that's going to happen. So Conforto would have been my third or maybe fourth option down while getting an elite player like Correa and also losing a very good player like Brandon Nimmo. So I don't want to talk out of both sides of my mouth here. I just want to be clear that I don't really endorse Michael Conforto's return.
I think that I'm with you in the sense where I'm not all in on like I wanted to bring the stats just to make a point because people are very attached to names, but I like the idea of Adam Duvall more. I like the idea of attacking an outfielder that can play the field or play multiple positions in the outfield, and then attacking somebody on the infield that can provide a little bit of pop. Look, I know that there was a small rumor of the likes of someone like a Profar who's out there who can play the outfield. I also know that there's someone that I really want, the guy I really want. I would love to bring back Brendan Drury. I would like to see him come back because I think he provides something that can – that I think he can provide something, whether it is it's across. I think he can play everywhere on the infield except shortstop. So having something like that, and then if you were to bring in, all right, put it this way: if you brought in Duvall and Drury, I would be very happy with that. I think I could really get behind that because it provides some cheap pop. It provides the flexibility that they like, guys that can play across the diamond. I think if they did something along those lines, yes, they're not the sexy names, they're not the well-known names, they're not the comeback names like a Conforto, but I think names like that I can understand a little bit more.
I agree with that, and a lot of comments coming in. Stevie Mac saying you might want to double check, but doesn't Conforto struggle badly against lefties just like Volge? Kind of log jams you if you want to use Conforto as a DH as well. I would say his struggles are not as bad as Vogelback's, but they are well documented for somebody who's got a sweet left-handed swing. He's never really developed against lefties, certainly not the way that even a guy like Brandon Nimmo has over the course of his career, to give him some credit. Carlos Ramos saying John just made the perfect anti-Conforto argument, finishing off by throwing a toothpick at the screen like my boy Razor Ramon, RIP Scott Hall. Carlos has had a lot of really great wrestling comments here throughout these. And I know everybody who's watching can see the comments. We didn't get to all of them to put them up on the screen, but they have been very, very, very good. Stevie Mac following up by saying John came in like Stone Cold with a beer truck and then sprayed Conforto and Boris right out of the Mets ring. Carlos saying, I'm a fan of the Brandon, I'm a member of the Brandon Drury fan club. Then says, and this is the guy I was going to bring up, baby, Trey Mancini asking for a friend. I think Trey Mancini, Brandon Drury, and Adam Duvall, and then
that'd be a hell of a
to the
finish.
lesser extent, Justin Turner. I think all four of those guys are better fits for this Mets team than Conforto or JD Martinez. That's my opinion, and I might even rank them that way. I might say Drury first, Duvall, then Mancini, then Turner. But there's a little bit of a gray area because you could slide some guys around because they're not all the same kind of player. Like, obviously, Trey Mancini can't play center field, but Trey can play left and right and then first.
Right.
With Drury, you're getting third base, second base, first base. You could probably put him in left field. I know he's done that before in his career, so you're getting a little bit there. With Duvall, you're getting a guy who could play center field, which might be the most value. And with Justin Turner, you're getting just an infielder. But I think all of those guys, all being right-handed hitters, also help fit this team better.
Yeah, I think a lot of those guys make a ton of sense for this team. They would fill in very nicely. And look, everyone assumed that Mancini was going to be a Met because of the connection that he has with Buck. And look, it could still very well happen. He wouldn't be my number one guy. Like you said, I think Drury makes a ton of sense. But to be fair, I think Drury can have
Get them both.
Get them both. Like, I would love to get both those guys. I do think that based off of the year that Drury had, I would think that the guy would have somewhat of more of a market. Maybe they just assume that he has a majority of his offense was in a bandbox in Cincinnati. But I thought he did well. I thought he did fine in San Diego as well. But yeah, I think someone like him, he hit well when he was here. It's not like he was this bum. Like, he filled in great. Like, you remember the bench mob? That whole thing was fun. But I think he has proven. And look, I'm not sitting here saying that
Drury got a little bit of a raw deal. Sorry to interrupt, but Drury got a little bit of a raw deal, not from us, but when the Yankees traded for him, remember he needed like eye surgery and all this stuff. Like, Drury's career kind of got derailed on that deal to the Yankees that kind of never materialized, and he had to build his value back up. You know, we're not talking about a superstar player, Ibby, but he's not some scrub either.
No.
I think Drury really needed to like kind of find his landing spot. And, you know, he sort of did with us to rebuild that value back. Mm-hmm. And then we saw what he did as a starting player. I know Cincinnati's a bandbox, Great American Small Park out there, but like, he really did a great job as an everyday player.
Absolutely. And people need to realize that Brandon Drury it's not like he was a nobody. I'm pretty sure he was a heavy prospect. And, you know, it didn't work in certain spots. And some guys just hit a little bit later in life. Sometimes they hit a little bit later in the career. If you're able to hang around, if you're fortunate enough to hang around, you can find a landing spot. And look, I think he fits very well here. I still think he's going to have a market somewhere. I think he can get a decent deal. Hopefully it's with us. We'll see. But I do think that he checks a lot of boxes from the power standpoint and the fact that he can play multiple spots across the infield as well. Because if you put him at second base for a game, then you can move McNeil out if you wanted to. Like, there's a lot of things that they can do, and clearly they like having that flexibility. And based off the 4 players that we mentioned, a lot of them do have that flexibility.
Yes, and the one thing I do want to say is I think there's probably a little bit more of a need in the outfield than on the infield. If we're being fair, you know, a true fourth outfielder like Adam Duvall probably fits the best. But the one thing I want to bring up is the flexibility. You know, I don't think you need somebody who can play center field, because I think if you had to rest Nimmo, you could put Marte out there for a game. I think you could put Canna out there for a game. Right. I think the ability for Jeff McNeil to go from second base and play left field or right field helps you out. And I think Jeff McNeil is at least average defender in both left and right field. I know every once in a while he has a weird thing where his feet get caught together, but Jeff McNeil is a can-do guy. He is a hustle guy, and I think he's a plus defender at most of the positions that he plays. And for me, that includes the outfield. I've seen enough to say that I have full confidence in him out there on any given day. Plus, if they carry Beatty might be able to play a little bit of left field as well. So I think being married, if they could only get one guy, I think still getting an outfielder makes the most sense, because I don't want to get stuck carrying a guy like Travis Jankowski or Terrence Gore or one of these guys, or even Tyler Naquin, who I thought was a good deal at the time. Yeah. You know, you want to get a guy who can be a true fourth outfielder, but I don't think it's like the be all end all, Ibby, if they can only get one. Like, if we get down to it and they're like, look, it's Trey Mancini and that's it, or it's Brandon Drury and that's it, I'm still okay with it, because I think they have the moving parts to make it work.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Like I mentioned before, one of the main points I made, you know, throughout the whole process when it came to Nimmo, it's like, this team doesn't have any outfield depth. You have to make sure you protect yourself. And look, you still have an outfield that can be a little bit banged up. You worry about Marte. You know, we all know Nimmo's history as well. You look at Canna's hip, and there's not much else behind it. So it's like, you need to make sure you're attacking that area and guys that can actually play the position, which is why I bring into question why JD Martinez for a lot of people makes sense. Unless you were taking him on and then getting rid of Vogelback, like, that's the only way it could potentially make sense.
But if Vogelback's not on this team, I would take JD. JD, I did it too. JD Martinez. I yelled at you before, and I did it. I would take JD Martinez if Vogelback wasn't on this team, but Vogelback's on the team, and Vogelback's making $1.5 million. Why am I going to pay JD Martinez? You know, even if he only gets $10 million, why am I doing that? It doesn't make sense.
Doesn't make any sense. So that's why it's hard to really get behind that one. Look, I think if healthy, yes, JD Martinez could be the best hitter out of all these guys if he is healthy. But it's a tough ask, and it's a tough ask because you'd be, you know, basically putting him in to that DH spot and then really taking away from your bench, because that kind of defeats the fact of Daniel Vogelback. So I think that you need to get guys that can play the field, and I think the ones that we mentioned make the most sense. Probably putting Duvall at that number one spot because of the need in the outfield.
I also think, I've said this on the show before, I'm a big fan of flexibility, and I know Buck is too, and I know you are too, lineup flexibility. And I want to see them be able to rest guys like Alonso, like Lindor. We talked about giving the starting pitching a little bit of a rest because they're older. Look, we all celebrated as much as Lindor and Alonso played basically every game. Ibby, I don't want them to play every game. I don't need them to play every game. I think they're going to be healthier and fresher and have better legs under them down the stretch in the playoffs, dare I say it, when we get there, hopefully, if they don't play every game. There were times, especially Alonso, that he looked absolutely cooked in his lower half in at-bats. And it was like, gee, I sure wish Darren Ruff wasn't an automatic out so we can put him up there against the lefty, once every 2 weeks to play first base. I mean, Buck tried to do it anyway. I really wish that Daniel Vogelback didn't hurt his hamstring so that maybe he could have at least tried to go out there with a glove and play first base, but it didn't work out. I want somebody who can be more flexible and versatile. And the thing is, with Vogelback, you already don't have that. But Ibby, at $1.5 million, if Vogelback is the sometimes left-handed portion of your DH and a bat off the bench, I'm good with that. He's not making any money. It's not like $10 million player log jamming the DH spot. He's not. He's making $1.5 million. If you told me right now that Vogelback never gets an at bat as a DH and only comes off the bench, I'm still okay with it because he doesn't make any money.
Right. It's look, we know people who might see this or hear this think, oh, well, we thought money was the issue. Money's not an issue, but the point is you still don't spend it stupidly. You do things with an idea. You do things with a plan. You do things that make sense. So swapping out 1.6 for 10, 15 million, 2 years, 30, I don't see how it makes sense, especially with a guy who has the back issues. And again, we'll say it like this. If the guy is the choice and he's here, we are going to root for that guy to be the JD Martinez of old and hit 25 home runs or whatever. But that's why we feel the way we feel, because there are a lot of question marks, especially when I brought up those second half stats from last year with the hurt back.
Well, the other part of it too, Ibby, is let's say they strike out on some of the other guys. Let's say Drury gets a chance to start. Let's say somebody gives Duvall a 2-year deal. The Mets don't want to, right? Let's say they don't get these guys. Justin Turner, I don't think so, but let's say he goes back to the Dodgers, right? Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden you don't have this market. But now, as a result, you get into January, almost the start of spring training, early February, right? JD Martinez is sitting out there and he'll take a $5 million deal.
Right.
Well, now it's a little bit more palatable. I'm assuming that he's actually going to get money somewhere, and that's another part of the reason why I'm not into it. If you're telling me that JD Martinez has no market and the Mets could get him, they're not going to get him on a minor league deal. But, you're telling me that they can get him for $3 million, $5 million for 1 year and just see what happens? Well, then sure, sign me up for that, because then he doesn't need to be in the mix. But if he's making $10 million a year, $10 million a year, you should be starting. You should be, starting at DH at least. And, being able to contribute in a meaningful way. You're not going to be a $10 million bench player that can't play the field. That's not going to happen. You could be a $1.5 million bench player like Vogelback and not play the field. That's entirely different. But, for JD, it comes down to money. It comes down to age. It comes down to the back. It comes down to handedness. It comes down to he can't play the field. There's too many strikes against him for me. So, Ibby, we got to get out of here. Any final thoughts before we do?
Usually I like ending these with saying we're going to sign somebody, but I'm not sure who that could potentially be by the next time we record. I'll say it, screw it. By the time we record next, I think that Adam Duvall is going to be a New York Met. We'll see if it happens, but I think it makes a lot of sense. But either way, Mets fans, enjoy this ride. I just think I'll bring it back to last night. It was incredible just to be involved in something like that because it happened so quick. Mets fans, you are the center of the baseball world. It is well-deserved. And if anybody ever says to you, oh, well, you complained when the Yanks were spending this and that. Number one, you were a little jealous because you wish it was you. We all know that. But number two, understanding that you dealt with so many garbage teams over the last 15 years, rolled out for opening day lineups and nonsense, whether it's the Omir Santoses of the world or the Colin Cowgills of the world. Those nonsense
Alejandro De Aza,
Hector Santiago's of the world. You don't have to worry about that now. You, if I could steal a line from Scott Boras, are shopping in the gourmet section. Enjoy it. You deserve it.
Man, I love that you said that. I hate Scott Boras so much just because he says the dumbest things ever with those plays on words and all this nonsense. Stevie Mack saying Benintendi and Ottavino make it happen.
Stevie Mack's calling it.
He took one of my guys. I think Ottavino, I think by the next time we record, the Mets will have signed another relief pitcher. I think it's going to be Adam Ottavino, but I still think there's a chance it's Andrew Chafin. I would like to get another lefty in that bullpen, knowing that you don't know if Peterson or Lucchesi can pitch out of the bullpen, and they don't really have much else in terms of minor league depth for somebody who can come up and pitch as a lefty out of the bullpen. Even guys like Negotic and all that, none of them are really throwing from the left side. I like the Rayleigh deal, but I think Gil get another one. So if it were my pick, I'd say Chafin. I think right now Ottavino's maybe a little bit more likely. I would take either one of them. Hell, splurge. It's Christmas. Get the Mets a gift. Go get both of them. Who cares?
Yeah,
I don't care.
Not?
It's not my money.
You
see the art that Steve Cohen buys. It's atrocious. Whatever.
Yeah.
He has $17.5 billion. None of it matters. It's all monopoly money. It's all made up, and I don't care about it. So spend as much money as you want. And there's always those Mets fans that are like, oh, now a hot dog's going to be – you're not paying the guy's salary with your hot dog money, okay? Let me solo this. You're not paying anyone's salary with the money you spend at a hot dog at Citi Field. This is not how baseball economics work. I think that's my final thought.
I think that's a good one.
It wasn't where I was going to go with it, but we will end the show the way that we should really end every show, which is Jeff Cohen brought this up greatly, and he said LGM. So yes, indeed. LGM, stay true to the orange and blue, LFGM, all of that great stuff. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in. All the comments coming in from Jeff and Carlos and Stevie Mack and Rael and all the great people that watch us live each and every single week. We're live on YouTube. We are live on Twitter. Tell your friends about it. Wednesdays, 4 p.m. Eastern. Of course, Ibby and myself are always active on social media. You can follow us. Our handles are right below our names somewhere. There you go. And of course, you should follow the show at Till Mets Do Us Part on Instagram and on Twitter. And if you can't watch us live, you can listen to us as an audio podcast wherever it is you get your podcast starting tomorrow morning, courtesy of the Chop Sports Network. John Sapanaro, Matt Ibby Ibanez, Till Mets Do Us Part. We'll see you guys next week. Peace.